Friends, in this video we are going to talk about input service distributor and distribution of credit by him. So the concept of input service distributor I explained you in the beginning of the topic. But once again, under section 2 subsection 61, who is called input service distributor? Input service distributor. So this is mainly an office only. An office of a supplier. Now this supplier may be of goods or services, and this office receives invoices issued under section 31 in relation to inward supplies of services. So first thing is, this is an office, and the specialty about the office is that this is receiving invoices in connection with the inward supply of services. Where the services are, that is not important, right? So here you can say that there is one head office, and this head office is governing factory number 1, factory number 2, then branch number 1, branch number 2. All these are being handled by head office. Now the service may be in the factory or maybe in the branch, but the invoice for that is being received in the head office, and the head office is registered as the input service distributor. Then that office can avail credit in respect of tax on those input services, right? So if the office is registered as input service distributor, if office is registered as input service distributor, it can avail credit for tax charged on input services. But for availing the credit on input services, we have to remember that this is subject to section 17 subsection 5, which is talking about blocked credits. So credit cannot be availed in relation to services for which the credit is blocked. So input service distributor can avail credit, and this credit is to be distributed among other registered persons under same permanent account number. So friend, this is the concept of input service distributor. So first of all, this is an office, and this office is receiving invoices in respect of inward supply of services. If the office is registered, it can avail credit of the tax which is charged on those input services, but subject to section 17 subsection 5, and this credit is allowed to be distributed among other registered persons provided those are registered under the same permanent account number. Okay, so this is what is called input service distributor, and now we need to talk about how and when the credit is to be availed and how this is to be distributed, and for that we are concerned with section 20. This is to be read with rule number 39. And then we also have section 21. So section 21 is something very small, on that will come little later. Right now we are going to section 20 read with rule number 39. Okay, so here I have given you a reference only what we are going to talk about. So section 20 read with rule number 39, this says, section 20 first of all, on rule 39 we will come little later. This says credit can be distributed only by issuing proper document. Only by issuing proper document. And the reference of this is given in rule 39, and that says it is called as input service distributors invoice containing detail as required under rule number 54. So when I come to rule 39, that will become more clear which is the document which is there, and the credit distributed not to exceed credit available. So whatever credit is available, only that much amount of credit should be distributed. And then it further says, if service is received by a recipient, then such a credit shall be distributed to respective recipient only. Right? So what does it mean? Here we have input service distributor which is already registered, and there are multiple recipients who are connected with this. This is recipient number 1, this is recipient number 2, this is recipient number 3, this way. Now these recipients may be factories, may be branches. Okay. Now there is one particular service which is received at this place only, but the invoice is received by the input service distributor. The credit taken by the input service distributor in case of the service received by recipient number 2 should be transferred to him only. It will not be distributed. Right? And then further it says, if services are received by multiple recipients, then credit shall be distributed in proportion of turnover of the recipient in the state. Right? Now the same example again, input service distributor having multiple recipients R1, then R2, then R3, then R4. So if there is some service which is received only by recipient number 2 and 3, then the credit of that service will be distributed among R2 and R3 only. And if service is received by all, then it certainly will be distributed among all, but the proportion of the distribution will be on the basis of turnover in the state. So this is section 20. Now some more provisions relating to that are there in rule number 39. So immediately in continuation we are going to rule number 39. So section 20 says credit can be distributed only by issuing the proper document, and the credit distributed not to exceed the amount of the credit actually available. And if the service is received in by the one particular recipient, then credit shall be distributed to that recipient only. And when the services are received by the multiple recipient, then that should be distributed in proportion of the turnover in the state. Now regarding this, what is said in rule number 39? This says credit availed in a month. Credit availed in a month shall be distributed in same month. The credit availed should be distributed in the same month, and when this is done, then GSTR 6 has to be filed. The return should be filed in the form GSTR 6, so that will have the reference of the credit taken and credit transferred. Right? Now this is further giving the formula for determining how much amount was to be transferred to one particular recipient. So this is giving amount to be transferred to a recipient. Amount of input tax credit to be distributed to a recipient assuming we give it number R1. How much amount is to be distributed? We have given the number R1. This is T1 divided by total T multiplied by C. So R1 is the amount to be distributed to the particular recipient. T1 is the turnover in the state. And then T is total turnover. And C is total credit available. Total credit available to the input service distributor, which is to be calculated. So it is nothing but very simple. When you calculate this turnover of the recipient divided by total turnover, in fact you are calculating the percentage of the total credit which is required to be transferred. Right. So first part is that credit availed in the month shall be distributed in the same month, and then the return has to be filed on monthly basis, that is GSTR 6, and the amount of input tax credit to be distributed to a recipient, that is to be calculated as per this formula. And then it further says how the credit is to be transferred. So here I am just writing that word tax credit. So if it is a credit of IGST, that is one part, and if it is a credit of CGST or SGST or UGST, how this is to be transferred. IGST has to be transferred as IGST only, right? And here we will talk about two different situations: ISD and recipient in same state. And here ISD and recipient in different states. So the question is, if the credit of central tax, state tax, union territory tax is available, then how that should be distributed. So that the answer will be based on whether the recipient is in the same state in which the input service distributor is, or he happens to be in another state. If he is in the same state, then no change. This has to be transferred in the name of CGST, in the name of SGST, or in the name of UGST. So whatever credit that it should be transferred in the same name. But if it happens to be in another state, then the transfer should be in the name of IGST only. Right? So this says, Rule 39 says how the amount of tax credit is to be transferred. So if the credit is of IGST, then that has to be transferred as IGST only. But if it is a credit for CGST, SGST, UGST, then how it is to be transferred, that will depend upon where the recipient is located. If he happens to be in the same state, then the credit will be transferred in the same format, otherwise it will be transferred in the format of IGST. And for transfer, or rather for distribution, ISD shall issue invoice containing particulars as per Rule 54. So when we come to the specific topic about the invoices, there will give you the complete detail what is required to be contained in the invoice which is issued by the input service distributor, or any other document which is issued by other assessees. So this is saying he should issue an invoice and it should have particulars as given in the rule number 54. Right? Now in a given situation, it may happen that the amount of the credit availed by the input service distributor, that the credit is increased or reduced because of change in values by his supplier. Right? So here we are talking about there is a supplier and there is input service distributor, and then we have recipient number 1, recipient number 2, recipient number 3. Right? Now whatever amount of credit is received by the supplier, or rather from the supplier to the input service distributor, same thing is distributed there. Right? Assuming that this credit is for 100 rupees and all three happen to be equal, it will be distributed in the amount of 33.33. This is also 33.33. This is also 33.33. Right? Now what happens? This supplier changes the value for some other reason. Now this is possible that it becomes 90 rupees or it becomes 120 rupees. Now if it becomes 90, then the credit already transferred is more. Right? So there is a reduction in credit. So in that case, the credit note shall be issued. Issue credit note. So the supplier will issue the credit note to the input service distributor, and input service distributor will issue the credit note in the same proportion to the recipient. So effectively there the credit will get reduced to 30. Right? But what happens if the value is increased? So in that case, the supplier will issue a debit note to the input service distributor, and input service distributor will issue the debit note to the recipients. Right? So in this case, issue debit notes. So the value of the credit will increase. This will become 40. Right? So first of all, the input service distributor is required to issue input service distributors invoice as per rule number 54, and if the amount of credit availed by the input service distributor changes because of issue of the credit note or debit note by the supplier in the same proportion, the input service distributor should also issue debit note or credit note to the recipient for changing the amount of credit. So this is in rule number 39. Okay, now coming to section 21, that is something very, very small. Section 21, this is talking about recovery of credit wrongly distributed by input service distributor. So in section 20 we already said that the amount of credit that can be distributed by the input service distributor is not to exceed the amount of the credit actually available. But for some reason, if it transfers more, then excess amount becomes recoverable in accordance with provisions of section 73 and 74. So we can simply write excess amount becomes recoverable under section 73 and 74. So when we come to those provisions, those we will discuss in detail, but right now it is enough to write that where the credit has been transferred by the distributor in excess, that amount is recoverable in accordance with the provisions of section 73 and 74. So friends, in this video we talked about who is an input service distributor and how he can distribute the amount of credit and how and when that should be done. So section 20 read with rule number 39 and section number 21. And when we meet in the next video, we will talk about certain more provisions related to input tax credit. Till then, have a good time.